much for joining us here at the Skeptrack at DragonCon 2023. We're so happy that you're here today. Thomas Westbrook is going to tell us all about miracles that kill. Take it away. Thank you.
Quick introduction. My name is Thomas Westbrook. I have a YouTube channel called Holy Kool-Aid where I have been investigating faith healers. I've been investigating the tricks that they use. I've been going undercover to meetings, and I've been putting together a whole series. And today we're going to walk through the dark history of faith healing. What is faith healing? And how did it get to be the massive thing that it is today? But first, I am going to work the audience just a little bit here. I need to do a quick ethics test to see, like, where do you guys stand on morality? Does anyone want to be questioned on stage to see how ethical they actually are? If you could be a good faith healer, you, sir, please come up to the front. Here's a microphone for you. Question number 1. For a large mansion, how many old people with cancer would you kill?
5.
5?
5 people.
I'm sorry, but you failed the test. The correct answer was 0. Please do not watch the rest of this talk because I will be revealing certain tricks that faith healers use, and I don't want you to be in on the secrets. Anyone else? Anyone else want to come forward? 14. No, new question. New question. I need you right there. It's hard to see with these lights, but this time for a private jet. Why not? A private jet. How many autistic children would you permanently traumatize?
Well, I mean, society kind of already does that in general, so my job is already done, so I wouldn't have to do it extra on top of that.
Man, that rationalization there is just next level. It is a private jet, you know, but man, I expected you guys to not all be terrible people. Why don't you come on up? Final question. This time for a Ferrari. How many people who have various conditions with their legs, various disabilities, would you permanently maim for a Ferrari?
0.
Yay! We finally found the winner! You can stay and watch my presentation. All of the rest of you get out. So, if you're wondering what that's about, a faith healer is someone who, just quick definition, someone who says, you have some disability, you have some ailment, maybe it's cancer, maybe it's back pain, you've been to the doctor, you've tried to have some sort of cure, some way of dealing with this, and nothing has worked, but I can heal you. With the power of prayer, with the power of faith. It's not exclusive to Christianity, but in the West, that's like the most common flavor that we get. But it occurs all throughout, the Eastern world. There's all different indigenous religions, and like even in Brazil. I just came from Brazil, and there were practices that they did involving like supernatural healing. You see it even in like New Age mysticism. You see it not just in Christianity within like Judeo-Christian religions, but you also see it in certain Islamic denominations. It's very prevalent, it's global, and there's a reason for it. There's a psychological reason for why sometimes it works, it temporarily works, or it appears to work, which allows the con to take place. This is nothing new. This goes back thousands of years, back before there even was modern medicine, when spirituality and the physical natural world and the spiritual world were all kind of one in people's minds. It was all blended together. And then right about 4,000 years ago, people started actually developing, certain herbs and certain things, starting to experiment with medicine. And over time, especially in the last couple hundred years, as modern medicine has taken off and we've developed ways to test things and see, does this actually work? Does this actually, pass muster? And if a cure actually works, we call it medicine. If it doesn't, if it's been tested and it doesn't work, it usually falls under the wide swath of alternative medicine. This can be things like naturopathy, homeopathy, it can be faith healing. It's a big umbrella. Today, we're just going to focus in on the modern faith healing movement. So, right about the just around the 1940s, right after World War II, there were a lot of veterans that were coming back to the US that had things like post-traumatic stress disorder, maybe they had amputations, they had shrapnel, things that caused them serious suffering. And also, with the horrors of World War II, a lot of people came back to the US and turned to religion, especially as the Cold War started kicking into full swing. There was this political movement to try to paint the Soviet Union as those evil atheists, and we are the good, godly Christians. And as this is happening, you have preachers who are in the early stages of the Pentecostal movement. I mean, this is after I guess we could technically go back to like the early 1900s, late 1800s with things like the Azusa Street revival and stuff. But when it really started to take off was in the 1940s. You would have pastors that would go from town to town and they would set up these gigantic tents. And then they would advertise it in the newspaper, they'd advertise it on the radio. And it was kind of this niche thing. It was you had the tents of like Barnum and Bailey, and so people were already used to like traveling circus acts. And then all of a sudden these preachers would come through. And these preachers would claim that people are getting off of their stretchers. People are being healed of cancer. People who are deaf are suddenly able to hear. People who are blind are suddenly able to see. And the population ate it up. Now, that's not to say everyone in the 40s was dumb. There were a lot of skeptics at the time, too, who pushed back against it. But what you really started to see is certain tricks of the trade appearing, certain marks of deception, where there's certain things that when you see them, if you see a faith healer using some of these tricks, you should guard your wallet and run as fast as you possibly can. I'm going to show you one of them right now. Does someone in the audience suffer from back pain? I'm feeling this word of the Lord that there's someone here who, or in your legs. You, sir, why don't you come to the front? So I'm feeling. What's that, God? Okay, I'm getting a word from the Spirit that one of your legs is longer than the other, and that's causing pain to shoot up through your spine, and it's causing back pain that you've gone to a doctor or a chiropractor and nothing has seemed to work. But today we're going to fix that. Today God is going to grow out your leg. Why don't you come over here and have a seat? Can I get a close up from the camera on your legs here? I'm going to lift these up, and I want you to see. Can you guys see how one of his legs here is, what is that, about an inch longer? Yeah. And as we pray, this leg here is going to grow out. Are you guys ready for this? All right, I need everyone to pray with me. Father, we thank you so much that you're here with us today. We thank you that you're here, that you're blessing us. You're making it. It's happening. It's happening. It's growing in the name of Jesus and the fire of God. Look at that. Look at that. That's incredible. They straighten out. In fact, I think actually, no, it's growing a little bit too long. It's growing too long. Stop. Okay. All right. We went too far. We got to pray a little bit more. All right. In the name of Jesus, grow this leg out. And at this rate, you're going to be taller than Shaq. There we go. I think that's good. There's a couple ways that you can pull off this trick. One of the most common ones, this is one that was done by W.B. Grant. It's been done by Todd White. A lot of like big name faith healers will do this trick. And what they do is they take the shoe and they'll slide it just a little bit off the foot. Now you can't see right here, but there's a gap right there where I've just slid the shoe off. And now when I hold it up, it looks like this one is genuinely longer. So then instead of this foot growing out, I'm just shifting the shoe back on the foot. Another trick that they do if the person doesn't have slip-on shoes, sometimes what they'll do is they'll take the feet and they'll like angle them a little bit to one side or the other, and that gives the illusion that that it's longer or shorter. There's other tricks. Sometimes the person themselves can be in on it. So like we've never met before, right? Yeah, but sometimes the faith healer will genuinely have someone that they've planted in the audience. And even if the person lies and says that they've never met before, what's more likely, that this person is lying or that all the laws of physics, everything we know about medicine is wrong? So Ian here can just shift his hips and just very subtly shift his hips in and out. And it appears to be miraculous, but he's in on it the whole time. There's another way that Todd White does it where he actually, rather than slipping the shoe off, he just angles the feet. So he'll kind of like do this action where he's kind of like shifting it a little bit, but he's got it down so good. But when you speed up the footage and you play it back and loop it, then you can see exactly what he's doing. Everyone give Ian a big hand. Thank you. So that's one of the many tricks that emerged. You started seeing that trick be used in like the 1950s, 1960s, and at the same time, there were other tricks because it's not just healing that these pastors are doing. They're also giving words of prophecy. They're also having divine knowledge. So I said we've met before, right? I think my mic's just okay. Right before this meeting, I spoke with him. And we talked while you guys were still filtering in. And a lot of these faith healers have been caught working the crowd before the show, gathering names, learning about their afflictions. And then when the person comes on stage, they'll say things like, "We've never met before today, right?" Well, and that might be right. They didn't meet before today, but they met earlier in the crowd. Or they have prayer cards. William Branham, he started the message cult. He was notorious for this. Jack Cove was another big faith healer, was notorious for this. W.B. Grant still does it to this day, even though he's been exposed by Darren Brown, and like there was an entire documentary that showed him doing this. Is they pass out prayer cards beforehand. People fill out the prayer cards, and then the person, the faith healer, will get the information, and either they look through and they read it and stuff, or they have an earpiece and they have someone feeding them the information. The most famous example of this happened, I believe it was in the 1970s, and it was exposed on live TV by the magician James Randi. I'm just going to play this clip real quick.
Is it Gould, Alice Gould?
He knew their names,
Stand up, Alice.
as well as the afflictions they'd come to cure.
Burning this arthritis right out of your body.
He was exposed live on Johnny Carson by the magician James Randi for gleaning information from congregants using prayer cards, which his wife would read to him through a radio earpiece.
Hello, Petey. Can you hear me? If you can't, you're in trouble.
Jody Dean. Jody.
Jody. Dean. Jody Dean.
No, she should be right there on your right side. Okay, she lives at 4267 Masterson.
4267 Masterson. I can see the angels of God all around your house.
A private investigator attended one of the services, discovered the exact radio frequency that Popoff's wife was transmitting on, captured the footage along with the audio of his wife, and then they played that live on Johnny Carson. At that point, within a year or so, Peter Popoff had filed for bankruptcy. Should have been the end of it. Except he's back. And he's doing the exact same tricks, and he's richer than ever. He has a big mansion, nice car, and no one's really doing anything about it. It's because it's perfectly legal. It's because as long as he pays his taxes, now a lot of faith healers have gone to jail for tax fraud and tax evasion and stuff, but even that, a lot of times there's loopholes for religious organizations where they're tax-free, and so the faith healers will lump everything into that, pass around the tithe buckets, tell people that they're healed, and then they make bank and don't pay a dime of taxes on it. Now, the thing is, Peter Popoff is obviously far from the only one. And when I first started looking into this, I was thinking that maybe he was an anomaly, because I used to be very religious, and I was raised in like an evangelical group, like church setting, where we bought into all of this. We thought that, I personally thought that God came down and worked miracles among people in, very obvious ways, that people are cured from their, cancers and stuff all the time. And then as I started to investigate this more, I found that it wasn't just Popoff. It wasn't just Todd White. It wasn't just Benny Hinn. It was every single big name faith healer. Now, does that mean that there are people in small congregations who genuinely believe what they're doing is real? I think that there are genuine people who believe this stuff, and I'll tell you, I'll kind of share some reasons why that might be the case. But the big name ones who have the TV shows and the private jets have been caught time and time again using various tricks like this, and even screening the audience. So Benny Hinn and Reinhard Bonko were two examples of huge faith healers. Benny Hinn would have these massive crusades where he'd pack out arenas, and people would come forward saying that they'd been healed of some ailment or another. But he had an entire row of security guards that would screen people as they were coming up. And if they had a condition that Benny Hinn knew he couldn't heal, you're never going to see a faith healer separate a conjoined twin. I'm sorry. You're never going to see them pray over an amputee and have the limb grow out. There's certain things, certain conditions where you have, an organic disease or something, and that you have some sort of abnormality that's very visible, very noticeable. A faith healer is not going to be able to do squat for something like that. And so the screeners instead would stand there and they would tell people like, oh no, you can't come on stage. You just have to believe God for your healing. You just have to believe God. It's on you. But then the ones that come up that maybe they have arthritis, maybe they have carpal tunnel syndrome, they have something that in the moment they can get a brief relief from, because the faith healer is, well, I'll just dive into it real quick and talk about some of the chemistry of what's going on that can cause people to genuinely think that they're healed. And I'll do so by sharing a story of mine. When I was in college, I attended a faith healing service. And there's this guy from out of town, and we were all super excited because there were all these stories of people that he had healed. I had some pain in my shoulder, and I wanted to have him pray over it and have him heal it. So I come up to the front, and he lays his hands on me, and a bunch of people surround me, and they all start praying, and nothing. And so they're like, well, we got to go at it again. And so things get amped up more. The excitement starts to build. There's an adrenaline rush. I'm like feeling it. I'm like in the moment. And all of a sudden, it was just like this flood of heat washing over me. And the pain in my shoulder completely disappeared. And I instantly declared myself healed. And it lasted for about 10 minutes before the pain came back. And there's a couple things that are going on psychologically, neurologically. If you are in a crowd, you're in like a group setting, there's so much pressure. A lot of us, how many of you guys are afraid of public speaking or crowds? There's already pressure. There's a big group of people around, so your adrenaline's a little bit high. You're coming up to the front. People are all looking at you. There's all this expectation that's building. And on top of that, as soon as they lay hands on you, there's a chemical called oxytocin that's released that is, sometimes they call it the love chemical. That's a little bit overstating it, but it's like when you actually like touch someone, physical touch can cause you to feel this a little bit of like relief, a little bit of like comfort, a little bit of stress relief. You also have adrenaline. You also have dopamine because you're super excited. There's this anticipation for your healing, and all of these chemicals are coming together. On top of that, you have cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and all of this is culminating to a point where these are natural painkillers that your brain is releasing throughout your body, causing you to feel less pain. So you may have been in a wheelchair, but able to stand with difficulty, with pain. But as soon as they lay hands on you, you feel this temporary flood of relief. You add to that the placebo effect, which, does everyone know at least kind of what the placebo effect is? Where even if you have like a drug or a treatment or something that doesn't actually work, sometimes if you have like a psychosomatic condition or something, you can actually get relief, or you can actually see remarkable results from something that may just be a sugar pill. And faith healing, in a way, is the ultimate placebo, because you have someone who you genuinely think has the power of God upon them, that is speaking over your life, saying you're healed, and there's all these people, and there's all these elements that add to the credibility, add to the believability, and all of a sudden, in that moment, you have that rush of chemicals going through your brain, and boom, you have a placebo effect. Now, if you were to test this in a medical situation, if you were to test it against a placebo, and you were to actually see, like, does faith healing work, then you get very different results. And this is what has happened when every time that these major faith healers have been investigated, not in a clinical setting, not tested, but whenever journalists have followed up with the people that they pray over to see the long-term results, you end up with a very, very dark picture.
When he laid hands on Laura Twilley 2 years ago, she told everyone it was a miracle cure.
I have cancer all over my body, and I haven't been able to walk at all, or pretty much stand, and I'm doing pretty good now.
She even threw away her cancer-fighting drugs, but within 2 months, she was dead.
She is basically a walking dead woman. She should not be alive because through both of her lungs is cancer. The doctors are overwhelmed the fact that she is still alive and still breathing.
Susan Norcane, her oncologist, rejected all these claims. Susan had an unpredictable form of cancer that was stable at the time of the crusade, but deteriorated afterwards, and Susan died 9 months later.
Perfectly whole.
You know that your leg is healed.
Because I can jump. I can jump.
You can.
And I can jump.
Let me see you jump.
I said, by those stripes, we are healed.
Former followers are beginning to tell tales of alleged deceit. The latest, Mary Elizabeth Turk of Dallas, who says Tilton promised to heal her cancer if she would give him $1,000. She almost died waiting.
He said, I've got the faith. All you need to do is obey and send the money. And he said because he was God's prophet.
She was so swayed by Tilton's promises of a miracle, she stopped her medical treatment.
Several months later,
Mary died from colon cancer.
The doctor that was her oncology specialist, when she was in the hospital taking her radiation and her chemotherapy, said that if she had received medical care in time, she could have been cured, which is a strong word in cancer.
Expect the miracle. Dear Jesus, the Lord's going to touch you, young boy. The Lord's going to touch you, sweetheart.
It didn't happen. I was not even discouraged. I know it's God's plan.
We believe that regrowth of tumor has been dissolved completely.
This is not a rich family, yet they were persuaded by Benny Hinn's TV appeals to pledge $100 a month. In his presence, the urge to give was overwhelming.
You know, I can stake my life on Pastor Benny Hinn's words. God spoke to me last night at the Colosseum Center where the crusade was going on, and he said, donate him another $2,000, and which I'm going to do it.
7 weeks after the crusade, Ashnil Prakash was dead.
Her daughter Jackie says Joyce too was persuaded to turn her back on her doctors.
One of the staff had told her she did not need her medicine anymore because Benny Hinn said she was healed.
What did her doctor say when she decided then that she was not going to have the chemotherapy?
He was very upset because she needed the chemo.
Joyce Vaughn died less than a year after she stood on stage with him.
I want to give you guys a little bit of a idea of just how big the scale of this is. The one pastor that you saw, Benny Hinn, the one with the white coat, he's been investigated multiple times by multiple news organizations, documentary crews, newspapers, and every single time they find people who are harmed, people who die, people who sometimes are permanently maimed because they continue walking even though they shouldn't, on, broken legs. And of the times that he's been investigated, he'll have an entire arena of people, hundreds of thousands of people, follow and show up and attend and believe that they're being healed. They're told that in order to have your healing manifest, you have to take action. You have to genuinely believe with all of your heart, and sometimes genuinely believing entails not listening to your doctors, throwing away your medication, throwing away your crutches, and taking that step of faith. And so it's not just the ones that are coming to the front that are experiencing this, it's an entire arena full of people. On top of that, when journalists will investigate people like Benny Hinn, a lot of times they will ask the faith healers themselves to present cases that are medically verified, and the faith healers will give them a docket of like their best examples. Like, these are the best examples. And yet when they follow up with them time and time and time again, they find nothing. There was a journalist with the BBC who investigated Morris Cerullo, who was a huge faith healer back in the day, had a private jet and bought the Praise the Lord TV show. I think it was from the Bakers, like when they were filing for bankruptcy. And Morris Cerullo, he was investigated, and this journalist found like something like 23 different cases, and not one single one of them was medically verifiable. And a lot of times what would happen is that the person would either misunderstand their doctor's diagnosis, and so they would claim that maybe they had a benign form of cancer and they said they had a malignant form of cancer. Or maybe they thought that something was deteriorating and the doctor was actually saying, let's keep an eye on it. There were also times where there were misdiagnoses. There were times where the faith healer would overstate what actually happened. And then, of course, there were people who thought that they were healed in the moment. They get caught up in the moment. They declare themselves healed. They go home. They realize they're not. And this happens time and time and time again. But when you're on stage with the faith healer and you genuinely believe it because you're a believing Christian and you don't want anyone to go to hell because you're a good person and you care about saving souls, so you want your testimony to be valuable for the Lord's work. So you get up on stage and you're not going to be skeptical. You're not going to doubt because that might cause you to not even have the miracle. But you also don't want to come back and say, hey, it didn't work. It didn't happen, because then that might actually be harming other people's faith. And so the faith healers have an entire system where it's like, no matter what, they get all of the praise and the publicity from the people that are, coming up to be healed. And then no one's, they're not showing the full story. And even after some of these cases have been exposed by journalists where the person wasn't actually healed, sometimes for years after the fact, the faith healers will still use those examples in their media publications as examples of healings. It's wild. Around the 1950s, I touched on kind of how some of these tricks started kind of coming into the faith healer's toolkit around the 1950s. There are other tricks as well, but around the 1960s, 1970s is when things started taking off to a whole new level, because they went from publications like the Voices of Healing magazine, the Herald of Healing magazine, where these faith healers people would come into their tent revivals and they get everyone to sign up, and as soon as they get names and addresses and have people, give them $1 or something for a year subscription, which at the time in like the 1940s was more than $1 now, obviously. But once they grow these subscriptions, then they can use that to like retarget people with like selling their books, advertising upcoming meetings, like asking them to gift subscriptions to other people. So that was pretty lucrative in the 40s, about as big as you could get. But it wasn't until like the 1950s, 1960s that television started to be a medium that faith healers turned to. So people like Rex Humbart and Oral Roberts, who started Oral Roberts University up in Oklahoma, they started broadcasting this stuff out like at scale. But even still, it was nowhere near what it is today. Even in the age of the internet, in the age of skepticism, there was a point where in the 1970s, and this story is the perfect demonstration of just how widespread this fraud is, if I haven't convinced you yet. In the 1970s, Oral Roberts, the faith healer, the traveling tent preacher, the televangelist, he already was making around $7 million a year. And this is 1970s dollars. He already owns a private jet. He already has a TV station. But he's struggling a little bit financially. I mean, not in the same way that you and I struggle financially, let's be real, but like he's struggling to pay, the hangar fees and all the bills and stuff that are associated with owning a private jet, because, poor guy. But so Oral Roberts puts up his private jet for sale, and this guy named Gene Ewing shows up and says, "Hi, I'm interested in buying your private jet, But before I do, can I share a piece of information with you? And if this piece of information or if this strategy winds up significantly increasing your bottom line, then, maybe we can like work out some sort of deal with this private jet. Oral Roberts is like, okay. And this was the scheme that he came up with. It's called the seed of faith. It goes like this. You send out some mailings to your audience and you say, God wants to bless your life. You're struggling with debt, crippling debt. You can barely pay your mortgage. You can barely pay your utility bills. Well, that just means that you need to trust God more with your finances. So, if you tithe, if you plant a seed of faith in the form of a tithe offering, the more you can give, the more strong your faith is, the more God will turn around and bless you. Some of you know this as the prosperity doctrine, but they took it to a whole new level because it wasn't just, name it, claim it, give and receive. It was you send in something in the mail, and then the faith healers, now they realize like, oh wow, he just sent me $5. This is someone who's they're actually engaged. This is a mark. This is a target. So they would send you back a piece of junk. Now the piece of junk, they wouldn't call it a piece of junk. They'd call it something like, here's some sacred Dead Sea salt that we got from the Holy Land, and it's like a little packet of, salt. Basically, it looked like table salt that you would get at like, a little restaurant fast food chain. They give that to you and they say, now what you have to do is sprinkle this over your breakfast or whatever and like pray and God will bless you, and but you have to follow the words of the prophet of God for this to really manifest. And by following the words of the prophet of God, you have to send me another check. And so they'd send them another check, this time maybe for $20 or something. They send it, and now they're invested, and they've already taken the first few steps. And once you've taken those steps of faith, you can't stop now. So the faith healer would turn around and send something back, and it might be like, oh, on this piece of paper, I have placed my hand and I have prayed this prayer. So what you have to do is now place your hand over this envelope or over this piece of paper, trace your hand and say this prayer with me and send it back in. And, and the whole time there's this communication network that's going back and forth where the person is telling the faith healer what their afflictions are, telling them what their needs are, and they think that they have this genuine connection because it's written in such a way that seems personalized to them. But here's the catch. Gene Ewing was running a direct mail company. Gene Ewing used to be a faith healer. He used to do the whole tent revival thing himself. In fact, one of his former attorneys told a story of how one time he went to go pick up Gene Ewing from the airport, or Gene came to pick him up from the airport, and next to Gene, the faith healer, there's a prostitute. Because not all of these faith healers necessarily practice what they preach. But, I mean, surprise, surprise. Here's where it gets really interesting, though, is that almost every single one of Gene Ewing's faith healing revivals, he would perform he'd resurrect someone from the dead. And the day after he picked up his attorney from the airport, the attorney goes to one of his faith healing revivals. And lo and behold, who is it that he's raising from the dead? None other than the prostitute from the night before. But at some point, Gene realized that it was more lucrative to have a direct mail business preying on people who are desperate, who are vulnerable, who are in need, who are oftentimes uneducated. At this point, they literally started gathering addresses of people in impoverished neighborhoods because they were more likely to fall for the scam. And so, and they would send these letters out to people regardless of whether or not they had subscribed to the mailings. And Gene Ewing presents this idea to Oral Roberts, and Oral Roberts follows it to the T. Within 1 year, Oral Roberts' revenue has doubled from $7 million to $14 million, and this is in the 1970s. Now, because it was so successful, within a few years, Gene Ewing's no longer the only horse on the track. There are now at least 5 other companies that are doing this exact same thing, that are presenting making all these letters, mailing them out, making them look like they're personalized, blasting them out to these people, getting these checks back, opening them up, taking the checks out, cashing them, throwing away the rest. And the list of the organizations, just to give you an idea kind of how shady this is, once Ewing got exposed for this, initially his organization was called Camp Meeting Revivals. He was exposed, so he decided to change the name of his business to avoid scrutiny, changed it to Church of Compassion, the ironically named, which later became Church by Mail Inc., which later became St. Matthew's Churches. Some of his customers or faith healers included Don Stewart, Robert Tilton, Oral Roberts, Rex Humbart, W.V. Grant, Billy James Haggis, and these are just the ones that Ewing was doing this service for. There were others also that used by some of the other competitors, including Mike Evans, Buddy Harrison, if you're familiar with Harrison House. Have you guys ever heard of God's Generals? There was a book that was written covering these faith healers in a way that painted them as like these incredible, faithful men of God. And it's like now a documentary, and there's all these multi-parts. Of course, it's biased because the person who was in charge of the documentary, Robert Sliardon, literally used this same service. Mike Deasy, Carlton Pearson, Mike Murdoch, John Avanzini. I don't know if you know any of these names. One of them, though, Kenneth Copeland, is worth $300 million. He was on Donald Trump's Evangelical Advisory Committee, flies around in private jets, has his own TV show, has his own network of churches, is extremely politically powerful, and he's using the same type of services. So that should give you kind of an idea of just how widespread this is, just how this is not about healing, this is not about helping people, it's about preying on the vulnerable and the desperate in order to line the pockets of a few greedy people at the top. And it's, like I said, $300 million was Kenneth Copeland's net worth last I checked. Benny Hinn would fly around, take vacations, in Dubai, where they're spending over $10,000 a night on, the ambassador suite in one of the nicest hotels in the world. Had a $10 million mansion in the 1990s. Now, obviously, $10 million is worth not as much. Like, that home would be worth a lot more now. But to try to push back against this, there have been numerous organizations that have offered cash prizes to anyone that could genuinely prove, under any kind of medical supervision or under any kind of, if you put different safeguards in place to make sure that that they're not fooling you like a magician would, or you're following up with the doctor and actually testing them before and afterwards. Like, there's different safeguards that are put in place, but there are churches that it's not that every single church falls for this. Like, Church of Christ put forth a prize for Jack Coe back in the day when Jack Coe was a huge faith healer. And for those who aren't familiar, Jack Coe in the 1940s, there was a big court case over a boy who had polio. Jack Coe prayed over him, said, "You're cured of polio," told the boy to take off his crutches or his leg braces. He did. It almost caused permanent damage to the boy's legs. So the parents took Jack Coe to court, sued him for practicing medicine without a license. And all of the faith healers, basically, he sent out this publication to his following, and like 100 other faith healers and like fans of Jack Coe all descended on the courthouse and protested. They wrote to the governor. They really pulled a lot of strings, and Coe was let off on a religious loophole. And since that case helped set precedent now to where faith healers are able to do this and get away with it. Now, there is a little bit of a silver lining to that story, and that's that later that year, I don't want to say silver lining because I don't celebrate the death of anyone, but the irony is thick in that Jack Coe came down with polio himself, and instead of turning to faith healers, he did the most telling thing you can do, and that's he went to the hospital where he died of polio. Not only that, But Jack Coe was scheduled to talk along with a bunch of other faith healers at this revival, talking about how to work miracles. And he had prophesied beforehand that like there was going to be he was going to attend this this meeting on prophecy and stuff, and apparently he failed to see his upcoming demise. That said, while this is going on, while the court cases are going on, one of the first cash prizes emerges, where people offered Jack Coe, I believe it was $5,000 at the time, and then it grew to $10,000 if he could actually prove, under medical supervision, that he could do anything miraculous at all. This was far from the only prize. The most famous prize is the James Randi Educational Foundation had a $1 million prize. A lot of people came forward over the years trying to claim this prize. And it wasn't just for faith healers. It was for anyone who claimed that they had supernatural or paranormal abilities. If they could prove it, they get $1 million. And the point of the prize is not just to be, cynical. I mean, how incredible would that be for all of us if we were able to discover that there's more to this world, that there's something supernatural, that there's something incredible that we could like tap into? That would be amazing. It's not just, oh, hey, we just don't want to believe. It's like, no, that would be incredible. But what none of us want to see is if it's not true, if it's not real, for people who are desperate, who are vulnerable, who are at a low point in their life, to be preyed upon by these vultures. So that's why I make this series and why I speak out. Currently on my channel, Holy Kool-Aid, I have a ton of videos already on faith healers, and it's continuing to grow. I do have plans eventually to put this into a documentary format. But right now you can watch all of this on YouTube and more. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to line up at the mic. Yes.
So I have a really good friend of mine, and she suffers from Erb's palsy. And if you're not sure what that is, it's when she was born, her shoulder was caught, and it caused irreparable damage to her arm. So it grew much shorter than the other one, and she doesn't really have use of it. And she was told by her pastor that if she slept with a Bible under that arm, that eventually God would grow it and heal it. And she believed it, and she had faith, and I was just like, no, and it's very hurtful to watch that happen. So my question is, how do you even approach that to just say, hey, I love you, but that's not true?
Yeah, it's always tricky because as much as I go after the faith healers, I don't think that the people who believe them are stupid. I think they are desperate. And I think that I really want to emphasize that, because I have people all the time in my comments that are like, oh, these people are idiots. How could anyone believe this? They get what they deserve. And the fact is, most of the time, as was the case with me, when you're raised in something like this, or when you're extremely desperate, then you turn to anything that you can. And when you've been taught that this is how it works, then it's very natural for people to go and gravitate towards that. As far as what to say to your friend, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head with, saying, first, like, I love you, but I don't think this works. Like, approaching it with compassion, not with judgment, not with like, you're so stupid, you're an idiot for believing this. But also, I think that there is a certain place where, like, if someone is going to the doctor, they're doing all that they can, and in addition to that, they want their friends to pray for them, or they go to church and people pray for them and it gives them comfort. I have no problem with that. I don't think it works. I don't think it's effective. I think that it's potentially dangerous because it can open a door into what we saw in this presentation. But if, I know a lot of people who, they'll go to the doctor and they'll seek out modern medicine and stuff, but then at the same time they'll pray because it gives them comfort or gives them relief or something like that. And so if that's where your friend's at, then I would kind of weigh like the harm versus the benefit. I know that there are other people on the Skeptics panel who might disagree with me there, but I think it kind of comes to like picking your battles and just being there to love your friend. Next question.
So the Peter Popoff case has fascinated me for a long time when you said, he was very clearly discredited and he still came back bigger. And of course, this happened several other times. Randy with Uri Geller, for example, when he exposed him, he became even bigger. So my question is, exposing these folks, and it's a matter of national record now that they are wrong, but exposing it just doesn't seem to have any impact on people's beliefs in it, whether out of desperation or just simply because they must. Is there anything else that we can do to, maybe limit the tide of this at all?
Aside from legislation, I think we have to speak out. We have to, investigate and expose. And I think that what Randy did, even though Popoff came back and he found a new audience, there are a lot of people who are here today who are not following faith healers and other charlatans because of the work that Randy and others did. And so I think a lot of these things, as big as they are, they'd be even bigger if we didn't do what we're doing and speak out and push back. But eventually, I do think that there should be legislation against this because it is fraud. It's fraud, and it's not just fraud, it's legal genocide for profit.
I was wondering if there have been any movements from the religious against faith healing that you know of, or even if there's been some skeptical and religious cooperation to try and take these people down, because I'm sure you could find a couple passages in the Bible saying this is the devil's work.
Yeah, no, there actually are. There are quite a few. The one that I mentioned earlier in my talk was Church of Christ pushed back against Jack Cove. And actually, that court case, Church of Christ helped with making that happen, and also were the ones that were like offering a prize and telling Cove like, hey, like, if you can present any kind of miracle, then like we'll give you all this money and like we'll change our tune on it. Now, nowadays there are organizations. There's, I believe, a YouTube channel called the Messed Up Church that talks about this stuff. There's a pastor. I'm trying to remember his name off the top of my head. I think it's Justin something. He himself has cerebral palsy, and he's been to a ton of these faith healing revivals, and obviously none of them are able to heal him. And he speaks out really publicly online. He travels to different events. I think his name's Justin Peters, and he's very vocal about it. So it's not just atheists who are skeptical of this stuff.
But I guess, yeah, I remember the prizes you mentioned, but as far as legislation and lobbying, I mean, certainly in the past couple of years, we've seen how powerful the religious can be when they want a law overturned that limits our freedom. Yeah. Can we use some of that to create some good in this? Just wondering if you know of any legislative efforts, the church, any church, churches as a plural.
Not that I'm aware of, and I think that if there is, then I stand corrected on this, but I feel like any effort to legislate anything on religion is going to be pushed back against by most churches, just because, if you don't necessarily want the church or the government meddling with church affairs, if you want to have a separation between church and state and have religious freedom. So, like, I understand where they're coming from, but I think that there has to be some kind of political like some type of political legislation against this, and I think there's going to have to be a joint effort between both religious and non-religious organizations.
One of the important takeaways I think you point out is that individuals leaning in this direction, this is definitely an affirmative choice that they're trying to go towards because they are desperate. Is the desperation coming from a lack of education at the primary and secondary levels or in the community and at home? Or is it coming from a lack of affordable or even accessible health care? And is there information on countries with broader universal health care where you see lower rates of faith healing and people falling for scams like that?
It depends. I haven't looked at the like big picture view to see like, okay, what are the statistics globally between, you know, rates of countries that have affordable or free healthcare and faith healing. That said, I was just in Brazil, and Brazil has free healthcare. I actually just got stitches in the ER so, like 2 weeks ago. And as I'm leaving the hospital, I'm like, okay, where do I pay? And they're like, oh no, it's free. You're good. I was like, what? Like, this is amazing. Like, how is it that we don't have this in the US yet? This is ridiculous. But there are plenty of faith healers in Brazil. In fact, a lot of these big name faith healers will travel to Brazil because there's an audience for it. There's a church there, you call it a church, some people call it a cult, it's called a Universal, where they genuinely, like, they do all of this stuff. And like the pastor there at that church has been caught on camera literally telling his elders or what have you all of the methods of like how to get more money out of people. He's like, oh, you can't pretend to be humble. You have to be like very like assertive and like larger than life figure, and then like ask for the money like this and do this. And so like he lays out this whole game plan of like very clearly demonstrating that he's just in it for the money. And that footage got leaked, and he still has this absolutely gigantic temple. So and that's a country that has free healthcare. Now, that said, I do think that countries where there tends to be better rates of education, where there tends to be, you look at like the Nordic countries and stuff, Scandinavia, various parts of Europe, and because there is better healthcare and because there is affordable healthcare, I think that does play a role in minimizing the amount of desperation surrounding healthcare. But I think a lot of people, their desperation sometimes comes from poverty. It's not just that they're searching for a miracle for some ailment. Some of these people, they're looking for a financial miracle or a financial breakthrough because the faith healer just told them that if they gave money, then their debt would be canceled. So
I'm reminded that the founder of Citizens United for Separation of Church and State was himself a Congregationalist United Church of Christ pastor, practicing for most of his life. I think that if there's going to be any kind of religious organizations that would be willing to support any kind of legislation, you're going to be able to find things like that within some of the very liberal denominations, typically not in the South. But if that's what's there, so that's just my comment on that. There is support for things like that.
Yeah, thank you.
Oops. Oh, sorry. Oh, it moves. Glory be. It's a miracle. Hi. Anyway, I also grew up with, my mother was mostly the crazy one in the family that was with the faith healers and whatever. This is like in the late 60s. She went to one, and she said, I want to be able to see without my glasses. So she had the guy pray for him. And she said, I can see. She took off her glasses, threw them away. I had a deaf foster brother, or very hard of hearing. I want him healed too. He's healed. She threw away his hearing aids. Later in life, and my mother said, I was blind as a bat, but I didn't want anyone to know that. She would tell people that her eyes were healed and my brother could hear again, even though she knew it was a flat out lie. But part of her thinking was, if I don't believe it too, it's my fault because I am not believing hard enough that this is going to happen. She was also a fairly educated woman, but she hated doctors. To her dying day, she distrusted doctors. She would rather go to the holistic medicines or this one or that one because, in her opinion, all doctors were on the take. But, the religious people, well, they were doing God's work. So it had to be good.
Yeah, and that's actually something that I've seen a lot in my research where if the miracle doesn't work, it's never the faith healer's fault. It's
Mhm.
always blamed on the person. It's
Mhm.
either you didn't have enough faith,
Mhm.
or there's some sin in your life that's unrepentant, and so it's your fault, and so then the person feels guilty, or other people are judging them, or stuff like that. Or sometimes it's not instantaneous, and you just have to keep coming back and like coming back and coming back. And some people will come back dozens of times. There's a faith healer named John Mellor in Australia, and like I was watching this documentary where this guy has been coming back to him trying to seek healing over a dozen times. And he's still coming, and there's been absolutely zero progress, but he's like, well, but I believe it. I see other things that, I can't explain. And it's like, just because something is not explainable by you, just because you haven't looked at all the ins and outs and figured out how this works, doesn't mean that there's not an explanation for it, or that there's, something that maybe we like haven't discovered yet, but maybe there's an explanation for it that's out there waiting to be discovered, versus all the laws of physics are wrong and some guy in Australia is able to talk to the big man upstairs and cure your cancer.
I have one more thing. This is a little bit lighter note. Growing up in the 60s, we had Catherine Coleman.
Yes.
All right. One of her bits was that she would lay her hands on you and you would feel the spirit and drop down. Mm-hmm. How did she do it?
I'll tell you. So there's a couple of things that are going on. My friend Alice Gretchen talks about this in her book, where they went to the Toronto Blessing, which was this huge revival back in the early 90s in Toronto. And you had pastors like Rodney Howard-Browne, who's like this big, intimidating guy. And like she talked about how like he would literally push her down. And so her neck hurt, and she's a kid. And so she would just like finally just fall down. The other thing is that if these pastors, when people come into the congregation, the ones who believe it the most line up in the front. So they're the ones who are most susceptible to it. It's kind of like hypnotists will select people from the crowd that are more likely to go along with the show. And so these faith healers, they'll do things where like they'll lay their hands on you, and then they'll get you all worked up and excited, and then they'll be like, fire on you from the top of your head. And there's just like, if all the rest of it hasn't gotten you in that moment, that's it. And if you still haven't fallen, sometimes they'll actually push. Mm-hmm. But most people fall willingly. Because if they don't, then everyone else is watching, and guess who's going to get blamed for not being a good enough Christian and not being filled with the Holy Spirit? It's not going to be the faith healer. Yep. It's going to be you for still standing. So I've been to faith healing revivals where people have just stayed standing, and I'm like, oh wow, those are the people who are honest, who actually like... But almost every single one of them willingly falls.
Yeah.
Next question.
Hey, Thomas. Yeah, I totally agree with some of the things you've said about just the power dynamics that are out there right now in our government, in our country. There's going to have to be an interfaith effort. You're going to have to get atheists and Christians, and I think people of other faiths together wanting to take these guys down. You sort of implied this earlier, but I just wanted to ask anyway about, there are groups like ECFA, Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability. There's senators like Chuck Grassley. He's a really high-ranking conservative, very evangelical guy who I think about 15 years ago they tried to get together. They did the Grassley 6 Commission. They did a whole report. Benny Hinn was one of the guys they went after, and it kind of looked like they had him. I don't know if any of those things came up in your research.
Yeah.
If you think it's helpful at all, or if it's just a big nothing.
All of them, and I think that they are helpful. The thing is, I believe I forget the acronym. You said ECFA, right?
Yeah.
I believe that in order to be so what they do is basically churches can report to them and basically pass a test of like they're financially responsible, if I remember it correctly.
It's a pass-fail.
And but you willingly submit your records to them or you don't. And so these churches like Kenneth Copeland, they're never going to submit that willingly. They're never going to show their books willingly.
For certification for them, that's correct. But they're primarily, that's how they make money is by membership, but then they're primarily an advocacy group on Capitol Hill, and they're basically a lobbying group, right? But there was a time when they turned that against these really bad cases like what you're covering.
Yeah.
And so...
We're at time, there's one other resource, though, that I want to give a shout out to, because it's called the Trinity Foundation, And it's a Christian organization that has been investigating and like really in-depth investigation on faith healers. And they've been one of the #1 resources for almost every single major media investigation into faith healers and corruption and greed and these scams. The Trinity Foundation has been extremely useful in that regard. So yeah, there are a lot of organizations out there.
Derek? Where? Come up on the stage so we can see you, dear. Come on. Here we go.
I'm a bad Derek. Okay, so
not as bad as faith healers.
So there is a movie from the '90s called Leap of Faith with Steve Martin, who's actually an atheist and he hates this stuff too. I've been trying to get Dragon Con. Anyway, it's called Leap of Faith, and they delve into all this in a comedy show. It's a movie, but it's spot on. It's really cool. I mean, they even talked about how some people get actually pushed down. They even address it in the movie. So
yeah. There's another documentary called Marjo, where a child preacher who then became a faith healer decided he wanted to expose the whole thing, and so he went back and did the whole circuit with a documentary crew, but showed them how he was doing it. It was from the 70s, but it's still an incredible documentary if you get a chance.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Thomas. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. So please join us in about a half an hour for our wrap-up for the Skeptic Track Dragon Con 2023. Thank you for coming.
And if any of you have other